Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third CME Palooza session. Let me bring up the slides for everyone to see. And pull up here. Okay. This is our lunchtime session sponsored by Daiichi Sankyo, industry updates and supporter positioning, building long-term competencies, agility, and resilience, moderated by John Ruggiero, Head of Medical External Affairs and Director of Grants and Education at Daiichi Sankyo. But of course, before we move on, the reading of our sponsors. I heard Scott say on the last session that we're having a competition to see who can do this the fastest. I'm clearly much faster than he is at these. He's so slow. Here we go. Gold sponsors: Daiichi Sankyo, PER, Academic CME. Our silver sponsors: Peer Audience, Medscape Education, Clinical Care Options, PCE, Haymarket Medical Education, Helio CME, Projects and Knowledge, Platform Q Health Education. And our bronze sponsors, which take up 2 slides now: PVI, Catalyst Medical Education, CMEology, Academy for Continuing Healthcare Learning, Vindico Medical Education, Paradigm, PIM, Global Education Group, CE Outcomes, Integrity Continuing Education, Answers in CME, RMEI, a couple more: Access Medical Education, MedIQ, Integritas, InfoGraphEd, Free CME, Med Learning Group, Primary Care Network, Prov Education, RedMedEd, Pure Voice, and CME Outfitters. 2 ways that you can ask questions. As always, you can use the free CME text line to send in a question, 267-6660-CME. And you can always tweet your question using the CME Palooza hashtag. I'll be monitoring both of those channels, so feel free to use the one that works best for you. And lastly, our speaker disclosure. Opinions, discussions, and or conclusions expressed are those of our panelists and do not represent an endorsement by or a position of their employer, its parent company, or affiliates. And with that, I'm going to bring up all of our panelists. So from this stage, John, I will turn it over to you to take it away.
Thank you so much, Derek. So first of all, good afternoon to everyone in the CME universe. It's an honor to join you today, and to also thank Derek and Scott for another great, effective CME Palooza session, providing us the opportunity to network, something that's so specifically critical at this time during isolation and social and physical distancing. So we're truly appreciative of this type of event. We do this for the sake of learning and elevating patient care. And I'm joined today by a solid panel of industry supporters who will introduce themselves and the companies that they represent, of course, keeping in mind that our positions are our own and not those that are official positions of our companies or our companies' affiliates, as was previously discussed. We're in the midst of a global pandemic that seems to be increasing worldwide, as all epidemiologists had predicted. We were also reminded about another pandemic this year, that being something that's so unfortunately present throughout US history, as well as worldwide history: social inequity, social injustice, and further the impact that has, sometimes unknowingly, on the healthcare marketplace. This presents us an opportunity for all of us to examine how we normally make business decisions, and perhaps think about 2020 not being the year that we cancel, which I know is very tempting at these times, but instead being a year where we pause in our thoughts, we learn, we network, and we prioritize those professional and personal matters that are most important, eradicating all of the unnecessary noise from our individual and collective environments. Now, as chair of the industry section of the Alliance, co-led by Griselda Butler, who's joining us today as well, we supporters have been recognizing the amazing contributions that providers have been making in adjusting their way of business in response to those aforementioned issues. We supporters have also been deeply analyzing our own business practices and our business matters, and doing what we can to drive positions that we hope are helpful to all of you. That is why we're here today. And although we're only 5 voices, of a much larger industry section. What we represent today are some of those conversations. I'm going to do my best to ask questions and allow you to hear from those other voices on this panel for a majority of this time. And yes, I know the CME universe is now breathing a collective sigh of relief. But in order for us to get started, I'm going to dive into the first question, specifically asking Griselda and Courtney to respond, and then pausing and seeing if others have anything to add to that. And that's the practice that we will have for this entire session. So the first question, again, posed to Griselda and Courtney. You are all well aware that supporters have been spending a significant amount of time analyzing COVID-19 and its business impact on industry engagements, specifically through CE and CPD channels. And there are still some uncertainties around what the continued pandemic may impact. Are there industry perspectives that you can share with the broader community that helps everyone understand some of the positions that we have as supporters? Griselda, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thank you, John. You're absolutely right in that we can't stop talking about the pandemic and its impact. And I think one of the things that's been really, enlightening, but also a really positive, unexpected outcome of these conversations has been how we can reposition the way we do business. One of the challenges and one of the things we've been thinking about really critically at OTSCA has been how we reach healthcare professionals and how we make sure that they get what they need at this difficult time. So the healthcare clinicians that we're reaching have a challenging patient cohort, as do most clinicians. But in the mental health space where we're at, and also in the nephrology space with chronic kidney disease, making sure that patients have continuity of care, those sorts of things are challenging, and making sure that healthcare professionals have the information and resources at their disposal to do their work in the environment in which they're operating, which in some cases is clearly very unfamiliar. They may be operating with less resources. And we really needed to shift or pivot away from thinking about, yes, we have a product and it's important that patients have access to it. That was part of the story, ensuring patient access. But what do healthcare professionals need beyond that? What kind of support services do they need? Do they need access and information to community-based services that they can maybe refer patients to who don't have access to in-office visits? I think the whole idea of really thinking differently about providing services and not necessarily focusing on product was something that became important to us. And then, of course, the patient story, really asking patients what they need. What are they feeling challenged by right now? And as it turns out, although a lot of them are dealing with very specific diseases, they're more concerned about family. They're concerned about their way of life. They're concerned about getting back to activities of daily living and some sort of normalcy. And how can we support them on that journey so that they're maintaining their health, but also that their lives are staying stable or maintaining during this difficult time. So those are some of the things we're thinking about from a business perspective.
Griselda, thank you so much for that perspective. I'd like to ask Courtney that same question, then perhaps pause, see if others have anything to add, and then provide some insight as well. Courtney.
Yeah, no, thank you, John. So I think, Griselda, hit a lot of points right on the head, right, in terms of, thinking about the patient, the HCP, what they're needing. When we thought about how this is impacting, not only obviously from our kind of operational standpoint in terms of changes that were occurring, change of scopes, moving from live to virtual, what type of impact and things of that's going to have. But we really looked at and said, when we look at our TAs, how does that kind of align to what's happening within the industry too, right? With the pandemic that's happening, right? So with the long therapeutic areas that we have, that's where we said, okay, we need to look at how can we get the most up-to-date information we can out there, because it's important not only from a product standpoint, but not from a product standpoint, but from a patient and HCP standpoint, to understand everything that's happening and not not just about what's happening with our product from that standpoint. So, that's where we were looking at, and we actually did an RFP within our ILD space that talked about COVID-19 and just how it's impacting the patient and the HCPs and how to handle those. And we were able to support several different actual CME programs within that space, and we're still looking at that as we move forward. And as we look at grants moving forward too, is we want to have the opportunity to look to see how does COVID-19 continue to impact, especially like I said, in the therapeutic areas that we're in, and how does that impact the HCPs and the patients. So I think we really tried to look at it and say, what can we do differently from how we're supporting programs. But also, I think it's really shown, I think even to within our group, that how important it is to have these types of virtual programs, how easily we were able to, I think, adapt. I think the providers did a great job of adapting and really coming up with plans to, continue to get that education out there from what was already supported to begin with. And I think, I just want to kind of say kudos to the providers in general, is that just, great way of flexing and changing and being, agile when in such a, crazy times that we're in at this point. So, that's kind of where we stood, where we kind of looked at things. And I think, moving forward, we want to continue to see how that's going to impact and continue to provide education that's relevant, not only for, products and stuff like that, but relevant for the patients and the HCPs.
It's very helpful, Courtney. In asking others to respond as well, perhaps think about the following. Have any of you or your departments that you represent paused, completely redid the way you typically do business of supporting education, perhaps even enhanced or accelerated some of the education that you did or supported, excuse me. Any specifics around that or other components to this specific question that others would like to provide? Riaz, it looks like you'd like to say something.
Yeah, John, thanks for putting together this panel. Appreciate it, and letting me have the opportunity to be on it. I think two things that I'll bring up there. One, just to answer your question of how we've changed, really. One of the things that we've changed our review process and the technology that we've used even to being virtual in a virtual environment and having we used to get together for a live meeting, and in that live meeting we would be able to hear everyone's voices of their opinions on a grant request or multiple grant requests if we're comparing them. But I think the other part of this that we have seen is that we need to become more succinct in our review process. You can't have you're just going to lose the attention of people to be on a 2-hour-long call anymore. A 2-hour-long WebEx versus a 2-hour-long live meeting are two different things. And so we have actually changed our process of utilizing more online platforms to capture the thoughts and the opinions of each of the members in a collaborative way so that they can see what the other person's thoughts are. And we do that a couple weeks prior to the live meeting. And that just makes the live meeting portion very engaging. And that's our goal, is to make it engaging and really to cover what the concerns or areas of concerns or comments are, and not necessarily just to present the entire grant from the start. The second thing I just want to add to the conversation is about really there's a lot of, as Griselda had said, the changing of the landscape. And I do want to bring up that there's actually a treatment landscape that's changed as well. And that's, it's not only about people are saying, here's the new normal, but some of the therapeutic areas that we are supporting are chronic diseases. And so the chronic diseases, you need to now take into account that how do you deal with that chronic disease, in a field of telemedicine or something like that, but B, also how do you deal with that chronic disease of dealing with a patient with now comorbidities. They may have that chronic disease and they have COVID-19, or there's some complication that COVID-19 brings to that treatment that was out there before. So that's also, a second thing that I think that has changed in the landscape as well.
Yeah, so it sounds like you and other industry supporters have accelerated and made more efficient the process of reviewing and approving grants, which is really great to hear. It sounds like new educational gaps are emerging that may have not once been considered in an original supporters medical education strategy, that we have to weave in the comorbidities, the chronic conditions, even side effect management, and the way the treatment paradigm changes now, and that's now part of the educational programs too. What about for the providers out there that are listening? Who can add some flavor to whether or not you are going to continue supporting grants? Are you expecting contingency plans because of a continued unexpected environment? What say you about those kinds of things? Anyone?
Yeah, John, I can go real quick. I was just going to say, obviously, from a supporting standpoint, yeah, absolutely. I think it's actually even, I think what's happened has actually shown the importance and the value of CME and these types of programs, and just the agility that we have with these types of programs and that the providers have shown, and just the importance of them. I think that alone right there says, yes, we're going to continue to support and we need to support. And when it comes to contingency plans, yes, I mean, even as we speak from RFPs and things like that, we would want to make sure that we have contingency plans in there, that if it's gonna be a live event, that there's a contingency plan that if it needs to go virtual, it can. Because again, we don't know, even how quickly things will be changing. Even if they do kind of go back to live, people might not have that preference yet, right? We just don't know yet. And I think we want to make sure that we have those contingency plans to, I think, ease the process as well from a change of scope. If we're proving things that are looking at where we've already looked at what the contingency plan is and it makes sense, then hopefully that makes the change of scope process that much easier if for some reason it happens.
Excellent. So potential action item for all providers out there and for supporters to be perhaps adaptive to is to accept grants with an executive summary at the front that identifies some kind of contingency plan should things continue. I believe very much so what Griselda had suggested, educational gaps continue during this time. They don't pause, and education is so important right now. And one of the things that supporters may be compelled to do, it seemed to work for several of us, myself included, is to remind our executive leadership that this is an absolute opportunity for helping them as they think about, well, what do we do with all the other tactics we had planned for that now are paused? Well, perhaps you think about channeling some of that budget into CME departments because those have not paused. And so that's something that we could explore more in further conversations, even beyond CME Palooza. Before I transition to the next topic, though, anyone else want to add anything to this specific question? Okay, great. All right, so I'm gonna go on to the next topic, which was seamlessly, at least attempting to seamlessly transition into the other pandemic that we mentioned. And I'm going to first ask Sue and then Cody to respond to these questions. Again, pausing and asking others if they have anything to add. And also asking Griselda to add in some flavor to her with her perspectives based on some of the experiences that she has been managing in her own community and nationally as well. So this question relates to social injustice and how it impacts the healthcare marketplace. So Sue and Cody, each of us have been witness to some of the tragic and awakening events that have plagued our nation for far too long: social inequity, injustice, and the fact that racial and socioeconomic health disparities account for a significant percentage of unwarranted care variations. It's shameful when you think of it. Supporters have also been discussing diversity, inclusion, and equity in so many aspects of their business and in its respect to healthcare and education's planning, educational design, and educational development. So Sue, first starting with you, what are some ways that supporters can help the community position what we might want to act on first regarding faculty planning and deployment?
Well, actually, so thanks so much for the question. When Cody and I were approaching this session, we thought we knew what we were doing, but we also heard ripples through our communications with colleagues around the IACE community that other folks were thinking about this very topic. And so what we did is we put together a 2-question survey. And Derek, if you want to go to the first slide. So we sent this out to the IACE community, and I just want to thank the 12 that were able to jump on really quick and answer it. And the first was, let us know, pick the phrase that best describes your level of support for accredited medical programs designed to address diversity, inclusion, equity, in healthcare. So 3 out of the 12, equal percent, chose the dedicated strategy, plan, and budget, which I thought was very impressive. Another 33% chose the limited strategy, supporting some programming using therapeutic budget. And then the other answer, 33%, said nothing to date, but in 2021 we'll be executing either a call for grant application or a request for proposal, or already plan to support a program. So those items that weren't chosen was nothing to date, but we'll be executing a CGA or RFP in 2020, and nothing to date and no plans. So I was excited, no plans, didn't receive any votes. So I'll throw it over to you, Cody. So what did you think of these findings?
Thanks, Sue. I actually thought the findings were, for the most part, what I expected. It's a mixture of us thinking of what to do, how to do it, planning for next year, currently doing it, and what we could do in our own strategies. And I think the comments that we've heard on this panel a little bit earlier reflects that, is that we're together as an industry or as a group. We're really thinking and realizing it's not just about the products or disease areas that we're specifically working in, but really starting to think through how we can incorporate that social inequities, COVID-19 in a continuing manner. And I think that these outcomes on this slide reflect that.
Exactly. And actually, for those of you who were able to join the earlier panel discussion at 10 a.m., led by our own Angelo Carter on healthcare and social inequities, I thought some of the comments were just fantastic. And I was just really encouraged by the thoughts that the panel shared. And so maybe the next slide will better answer John's question about what kind of activities you can actually do. So this is, I don't know, Cody, do you want to lead this slide?
Sure. So it was check all appropriate boxes that describe the ways in which you currently plan to focus on healthcare disparities. Supporting accredited programs that address the healthcare needs of minority patients within a specific disease or condition. Supporting accredited programs in a specific disease that are hosted by medical societies that represent clinicians who care for minority patients, supporting programs where the race of the faculty represent those suffering with a specific disease or condition, sponsoring meetings designed to address healthcare disparities, commissioning an independent needs assessment to gain clarity about healthcare disparities of a specific disease condition and root causes, and then other. Sue, I will actually ask you the same question. What was your impression, and what did you think of these results that we saw?
Right. I was excited because I think at AstraZeneca, we've got the whole situation that we're in is devastating. It's made us all really look outside and then look inside, including the leaders at AZ. And so some of the activities that the company has accelerated because of the environment makes it where it's a more fertile ground, I think, for someone like me with maybe more limited MEGO budgets to be able to support different activities. So I was encouraged by the data because I thought other pharma companies are more advanced than where I'm at, but they will give me the information that I need to better create a business justification internally. So actually, if you can put the slide back up, Derek, we can go through. I thought it was interesting, 20% we're going to commission an independent needs assessment. I thought that was exciting because We know a lot of what the gaps are, but it's like, how do we address those gaps? I think it's really in the how, and it's not going to be an overnight turnkey kind of solution. These are years in the making, and it's going to take a while and a lot of brain trust to figure those out. I thought one of the easier thing was to sponsor a meeting that's designed to address healthcare disparities. So there's a lot of different organizations that have annual conferences. So on the earlier panel, Dr. Vega talked about his role with a Latino, and there's a Latino organization that addresses every year. They have their annual conference, and it talks about all the issues that are affecting the Hispanics. So it would be easy, right, to sponsor that kind of meeting. I thought the one thing that I'm truly looking for in grant proposals would be companies saying that they are going to look for faculty that represent the patients that are suffering with the condition. So what's very interesting is in the lupus space, we know that it's highly prevalent in childbearing young Black women, but it's so hard to get Black women to get involved with clinical trials, right? And it could be a trust issue, lots of different issues. So how do we need to find those Black physicians that serve as champions so that in our clinical trials, so that we can enroll more of those patients. So that's my thinking. That was kind of one of the easier things to do. But I've spoken long enough, so I'll pause. And John, it seems like you have something to add.
Yeah. So I think that you're both hitting on two specific aspects of this question. There's first the educational design and outcomes aspect, which was going to be another question of mine, but you're addressing it with your two slides right now. There are the issues of health disparities and the fact that, education is only as good as those who are recipients of it. And often, unfortunately, there are so many clinicians and patients that are not exposed to the educational programs that they need to be exposed to. Many people in this community have heard me say repeatedly that on average, every single year, the amount of patients, US adults, who are not on evidence-based care is about 45%. And that is a phenomenally dangerous and scary statistic to throw out there when we consider we're in the United States. And a lot of that is due to unwarranted care variations, which includes health disparities. So clearly there's a problem. Education needs to focus on finding those patients who are not being exposed to the evidence that is going to take them to a level of best personalized care. But there's another aspect to this, and I'm so glad to see that this came forth in the data, right? There's truth in data. Are there opportunities that we as supporters can encourage providers, or providers on their own can start thinking about the planning of educational programs so that faculty is also diverse, not just in background, but diverse in perspectives? So I wonder if you have anything that you want to add to that. I'm not sure if it was really a question or more of a statement, but I'd love to hear your perspectives on that.
I'll open it up to the other panelists if they want to jump in.
Sure. Let me just say, I heard a lot of great things in what was said, but one of the things that jumps out to me is that when we're thinking about the design of education and the implementation and the measurement of it, so many critical aspects go into a successful program. But I think what the social justice issues that have been raised have brought to light is that we need to be thinking about, are we looking at the right outcome for our education? So to John's question about the inclusion of a variety of perspectives, diversity of perspective, that's critically important in faculty, but it's also an opportunity for organizations that design and implement and measure education to look at their own makeup. Who's designing the education? Who's conceptualizing the educational proposal, or who's looking at the gaps? And are they being interpreted through lenses of different perspectives? I think it starts right at the very beginning with thinking about, what is your own makeup as an organization if you're a provider? What is the problem you're trying to tackle? who are the folks who are impacted by that problem, and do they have a seat at your table? Are they represented in your discussion? And then as for the design, it's not just going to be faculty, which is critically important, but it's really about, if you're doing an online program and you're doing a simulation, what do those patients look like in the simulation if they're animated? What does the environment that surrounds them in an activity look like? What does a real patient visit look like in certain communities? Those sorts of things, understanding the environments in which both the healthcare professional and the patient are existing, and then making sure that there's representation across the board from the initial conceptualization of the program all the way through to the measurement, so that you're getting a social, racial, equitable lens on the program. I think those are critically important.
Griselda, you're helping me really, again, seamlessly transition into another question, which was going to be asking you to add your perspective. Conversation. I mean, many of us know that you have been so deeply involved, both locally and nationally, in the fight for social justice. And so I was going to ask for your perspective on this, but just playing off of what you said, which I thought was a really excellent comment, should supporters be recognizing the contributions that providers are making if they follow that guidance that you just gave? Should they be weighing that into the evaluation of grants?
I'm going to have to say yes. If that's part of your educational strategy and you are expecting to see that as part of a grant, you should, first of all, make sure that you have the right folks reviewing grants on your end to be sure that you're getting, again, that diverse perspective, that someone who is well-versed in the issues that might come up have an opportunity to review the content and make sure that it is in alignment, that it's designed to deliver on that outcome that they've identified. And I think that absolutely, there's no reward necessarily for doing the right thing. I just want to be clear. If you've decided that you're going to incorporate issues around health inequity and disparities, and if you're going to add a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens to your grants and to your strategy, then you have to be embedded in it. It's not one-off type work. And it really does come from both the top down and the bottom up. And again, I can't emphasize enough about, importance of educating yourself and having a diverse representation so that the people who are impacted by it, patients, patient advocacy organizations, healthcare professionals, the institutions they represent, all of the stakeholders that are involved to have a role to play in the care continuum and in the health and well-being of the patient, including family caregivers, that we get their voices in there. It's easier said than done, but it can be done on a small scale. And I know we'll talk a little bit, perhaps about how that could be approached, but I want to make sure people understand that there's no feeling, at least from my perspective, and there's no reason why you need to undertake something like this just to undertake it. Start with educating internally, making sure you understand the issues. And then if you see an opportunity to weave health inequities into the content of the program, because that's usually where you end up having to start, do that. And make sure you're bringing in the voices, bringing in the different voices and the diversity to ensure that you're doing something that's going to add value to the community.
Griselda, that is so great. Let me ask all of you on the panel, have any of you modified any of your grant review committees in the spirit of what Griselda is recommending? Or perhaps if you haven't thought about it, would you be open to doing so?
Well, so I can jump in. So maybe to back up a little bit, at AstraZeneca, we have business resource groups. So like African American, Hispanic, military, you name it. We've got them Asian American. And so I have tried to become involved with as many as possible so that I can better understand the issues that they all have. And so that's why I can speak a little bit more about the issues that are plaguing the Hispanic community. And so while I haven't necessarily changed the composition of my review committees, I don't think I'm necessarily there yet because I'm not getting the type of grant proposals that I need to. I have found colleagues around AstraZeneca that I can call on, that I can invite to the committee meetings to give their perspective?
So it's so encouraging and so welcomed to hear you being so thoughtful and also completely transparent when you just said, you know what, I'm not there yet, but I'm going to get there. I mean, that's such a great attitude to have, especially this year. And it's exactly what we're expecting people to learn from, you know? And so let me ask Cody and Sue, do you have any other perspective that you want to provide for this specific topic? Then we'll ask others, and then we'll try to transition to the next topic. So go ahead, Cody, Sue, and then others.
Go ahead, Cody.
I would just say I really appreciated Sue's comments and Griselda's as well. It's everybody's going to be at a different stage here. You know, Genentech, Takeda, Pfizer, everybody, whoever, we're all at different places. But to Sue's earlier comment, the great thing of our community that I truly value and appreciate is that we can all learn from each other. That this problem that we're trying to address, or this issue, that we're trying to address is bigger than any one of us. And I think the collective power of CME is what's going to really help deliver potentially some results. And to Griselda's comments a second ago, for us individually, we really got to think through what the commitment is that we have, you know, with our IME teams, but then internally to have that discussion to affect change and start internally. And I know at Takeda, that's one of the things that we've started to do, is starting to have those discussions. What does it look like to affect change internally with strategy? How does that affect our business decisions? How does that affect what we support with IME? And it's a great time for us to be doing that as we start looking into our 2021.
I think it's an excellent point. Can you all imagine? I mean, there are so many people who value the work that we do as supporters of the work that the providers do. They see truly the value of continued education and continued professional development. Some people need to be educated on that, and that's to be expected. That's part of our makeup. It's part of our responsibility to champion the value of our work. Okay, but there's so many people that do value it. Can you imagine how many more people would see the value in it if there was a provided educational opportunity that identified a benchmark, a very disturbing benchmark of health disparity, and then as a result of education was able to overcome that really low benchmark? I mean, just think about that. Think about what's possible. So thank you so much for providing contribution to this very important question. Courtney Riaz, I don't mean to leave you out of the discussion. If you have anything you'd like to add, we can pause.
I have nothing more to add.
I think it was a great conversation. Actually, taking a few points away from it. So I appreciate it.
Good. That's great to hear, Courtney. Thank you for your transparency too. All right, so let me go ahead and transition on to the topic of the third topic. We could spend all of our time talking about all of these topics, but of course we have limited time to work with. So I'm going to pose this toward Riaz and then ask others to add as well. Riaz, you've been long involved in the CE CPD industry supporters benchmarking initiatives, you know, presenting to supporters the data of what we're doing every single year and what we could do doing better. You've also been deeply involved and interested in moving patient centricity forward in educational planning. So based on some of those historical interests and involvement, and what you also heard today, and reflecting on what you're also learning from supporters through the benchmarking process, is there any emerging trend that compels this community to begin more actively taking steps toward using education as a means to impact local or national policy changes? Thoughts you might have on that, and then others.
Yeah, thank you, John. So we could spend a long time on this, and I'll try to keep my comments brief, and I'm really going to learn from the others as well. I think relevant to today's topic, where we have seen the industry move and some of the changes around patient centricity. The key components to really keep in mind are that the patient voice, the patient perspective is critical to keep in the mind of all the education that we do. We support, we produce, we develop, that keep that patient in the center of the conversation. So that means that now more than ever, you really do need to make sure that you're incorporating that patient perspective into the education. And we've seen, actually, from a benchmarking standpoint, there are a fair amount of the industry who are, evolving their support, and they're able to either support some patient education. I know that's different than patient centricity, but the patient education and the healthcare professional education, but then also the healthcare professional education, they're really involving the patient voice. And when we talk about racial disparities and social injustices and things like that, topics of that, or even comorbidities living with COVID-19 and any other disease state there is, comorbidities, that's important to keep in mind as well on the education. And I think that's where it's been evolving, that we've seen it evolve as an industry, that it's important to keep in mind.
So are you under the idea, or promoting the idea that even if supporters are not responsible for the support of patient education, some of us are, but some of us are not.
Right.
So if we're not responsible for that, the idea of pulling in patient voice, patient perspective, patient values should be part of the medical education strategy, as well as the decision-making process on the most effective grants we support?
Yeah, so that's exactly it, John. Is that, yeah, you're right. It has to be part of your strategy, and it should be incorporated into the strategy. The second part of that is, just because we may not be able to support the patient education, doesn't mean that the patient education is not being supported in another part of the organization. So when you're developing the strategy, and to be more inclusive, to make sure that there's some kind of tie-in from the other parts of the organization that may be supporting the patient education when appropriate, that the patient centricity is there, and it's a cohesive story that's being told, that's moving the whole conversation forward. So that's 2 points in there.
That's really helpful, Riaz. I'm interested in hearing others' perspectives as well. Have you been involved in the support of a patient education initiative? Have you been involved in tethered programs where patient and HCPs are being educated together? Or are you part of planning for your medical education strategies while thinking of the patient voice? Any perspectives?
Well, so I can, go ahead, Courtney.
Oh, I was just going to briefly say, from our standpoint, I don't do the patient education because we have that handled through our patient advocacy group. I do think that it's important to have that kind of patient voice within the programs that we support, and or even potential patient education material development. I think for HCPs, that you educate the HCPs on that. I think that's where we kind of see the patient education piece come into play. But otherwise, based on how we operate, anything patient initiative wise goes through a different group.
Let me ask that as a quick round robin, Sue, before we go to you. Just by a show of hands, and make sure that everybody can see, because we're on limited screens here. But how many of you have departments that support patient education in addition to the HCP education? How many? Okay, now the hands can go down. So it's like 3 versus 3. And then how many of you collaborate with other departments in your organization to make the most effective decision on HCP education? So again, 3 over 3. So maybe there's an opportunity to do just what Riaz mentioned, collaborate more often, think through with diverse perspectives, like our last topic, on what makes the most effective program to pull through the patient voice as one of those educational objectives. Sue, I'm so sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just thinking, so to go back to your earlier question, so I think a lot of what I do is more indirect. So I have a great collaboration with colleagues in patient advocacy. So a lot of the times I will have conversations with them and say, who are you meeting with? Can we talk about this? Have we shared this? And say, tell me how CME can address some of the things that you're hearing. And I've also been working on establishing a great working relationship with a corporate affairs colleague. And they actually have been awarded money to help with the whole healthcare equity. They like to turn it around a little bit. So instead of the inequities, it's healthcare equity. So I love the positivity there. And so I think that we, even though we may not be able to fund patient education outright or 100%, I think that there are other ways that we can do it. And by having these relationships with patient advocacy and with corporate affairs, I am hopeful that the things that we do in MIGO and the kind of questions that we're asking and the data that we provide will make it to our government affairs office. Yes, very indirect, but I think it's one avenue that I don't think we should discount in this.
We should always be thinking about ways that outcomes from educational programs could affect, or at least impact in some way, local or national policy. It goes to every single topic we've discussed today, whether it's about the COVID pandemic, whether it's about the injustice pandemic, or whether it's about just pulling in the patient voice altogether, regardless of any pandemic. So I think that that's a really good point. And it's something that I do challenge providers to think about and to supporters to think about as well as they evaluate submissions that are coming through. Any other perspectives on this? And then I'd like to go to a very quick round robin.
I think maybe just being patient-centric is there are plenty of folks within AZ who will share on our social media platform that they have a parent with a disease or they have a disease. And so I will reach out to them to get more information so that when I take grants to my committee and we talk about things, I'll talk about things that are aligned, and then I'll say, listen, this is really important because of this. This has got that patient voice component. And I try to provide them with all this information. And a lot of times medical, we're still focused on our medical plan, which is very specific with the healthcare provider, but they are, I think, in the world that we're living in now, they're starting to see how we can really be, we can pay more attention to the patient voice. So I think, we have a great opportunity, whether we support programs outright for patient education directly or not, to make sure that the education is very patient-centric. We just have to do our homework, and we just have to know what the challenges are.
Agreed. So helpful. Thank you for those perspectives. I'm so grateful to all of you for joining me today because, just providing your diverse, thoughtful, and experienced perspectives is going to help us elevate these kinds of topics to the level of conversation, much like Cody alluded to. We're all in this together, and we therefore need to solve these things together. And doing so compliantly in collaboration with the provider community is also expected and acceptable. So let's think through the barriers of ensuring that we can do something like that. So with that, I ask you this one final round robin question. And I'm going to ask each of you to just provide very brief perspective on this. What is the one suggestion you have either for the providers or the supporters to methodically take action on any of these items that we discussed? So why don't we go ahead and start with Courtney, and then I'll just go around at least the way it's viewed on my screen. So Courtney.
Yeah, I was going to say, from a provider standpoint, I think the opportunity for contingency plans within any live program that you're submitting is very important, and I think having that available will ease the process down the road if something does change. From a supporter standpoint, I really liked some of the points, and like I said, some of the things that I'm going to take myself is that having the right people reviewing the grants, especially when you're talking about diversity and inclusion and social justice, I think that's an important piece to have. That yes, we can focus on those from a standpoint of objective, but you also need to have the right people reviewing and looking at it. So,
thank you, Courtney. Sue, what about you?
So for me, I was thinking I could go in so many different directions with my response, but a lot about this inclusion thinking, this diversity in our new culture. I just think it's about bringing your whole self to work. And so when you do that, I just find that I have a different voice when I bring this passion of trying to address the healthcare inequities and make the healthcare system just more equitable. And so I think it's just figuring out what's important to you, and others will see that passion, and then you can potentially make some big, maybe small changes with a big impact. So it's figuring out what's important to you, bring that passion into your work
So powerful. Make small changes
with big impact.
right? Mm-hmm. It goes back to the way I started this panel discussion. It's not a year to cancel, it's a year to learn and to prioritize what's important to us and what's important to our businesses and eliminate all the unnecessary noise that has weighed us down for so many years, right? So thank you for that. Griselda, what about you?
If there's one thing I can impart, it's going to be, first, take a step back. There's a feeling right now that you have to be doing something. You've got to be busy. There's so much to do. And that's because there are so many challenges and issues that have been brought to the forefront. But I promise you, they've all been there all along, sadly. And we've all been working towards solving them all along. If there's anything I love about this community is that we are solution focused and we're being called to dial it in. Dial in those skill sets that we have, the focus on learning science, behavioral science, better understanding the needs of healthcare professionals and patients and the landscape in which we're operating, so that we're not just looking at it from an education perspective, but that we're looking at it from a very holistic perspective. What is the end result we want to achieve? And how do we get there? And with the understanding that you will not be going alone on that journey, that you will have to pull in any number of subject matter experts, and that subject matter experts are not limited to thought leaders and KOLs. They are your colleagues, they are patients, they are advocacy organizations, they're health policy experts, they are decision makers at every level within the healthcare industry who have influence and wield power. But just remember that we have power too, and we can use it.
Oh, that's so. Oh, Griselda, I wish you were running for president right now. I mean, seriously, what a powerful statement, right? Give yourselves permission to step back, to analyze, to learn. Give yourselves permission to not feel guilty about not having the answers just yet, but to be willing to learn, prioritize, and use your entire environment to help make things better. I think that's great. That's great. Cody, what about your perspective?
I would just say, go back to my earlier point, that we're all at different levels of where we're at with trying to figure out if we're how to address this within our own companies and strategies, and if we are, and what that commitment is, and how long that's going to take to affect change internally. And so I would just encourage both providers and supporters across the board, let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep the dialogue going. If it's, and even to toss this out there, if anybody out there, whether you're a provider supporter, you want to have a peer-to-peer dialogue, call me up. Let's do that. Let's have that discussion. Obviously we can't give away strategy or proprietary information, but I think we can continue this dialogue at a high level and figure it out, because none of us, whether we're a provider or supporter, have the answer. No one answer really is going to be the true fit here. And I think that we're going to really need to work collectively as a group, as a community, CE CPD community, to have those discussions, be open, and to figure out what that compliance conversation looks like. But definitely open to it, and let's just keep it going.
Open to conversation, figure out the ways we can compliantly continue this dialogue, work with one another, provider and supporter. Really good points, Cody. And Riaz, finally your perspective.
That's almost tough to go in last after a huge.
I planned it purposely that way, just to get to you.
I know. So I'm gonna, I guess the only things I can really echo a lot of what was already said, but I really would, the piece of advice that I would take away and I would really tell people to focus on is really take a step back, but look at the environment and make sure, take this time to learn, to really, there's a lot of things that we are all doing different, be it a virtual program that used to be live, but we are all, healthcare professionals are now learning differently. Different healthcare professionals are attending the educational opportunities and taking advantage of these opportunities than were before. So really use that, this is kind of from go back to when you first were to do a satellite symposium at a national society. You may not have known who was going to show up that time, but then the second time, the third time, you kind of build upon your knowledge. And that's really what we have to do, is really build upon the knowledge of the attendees from who attended the last virtual program, and that's going to be different. But also, from a provider standpoint, keep the patient in mind and keep the patient forefront. That's my tidbit back.
Build upon our knowledge and rise to the occasion.
Exactly.
We're coming on, which is our sign that it's our time to end. I want to thank all of those people who have been contributing to questions. I've been using those questions on the side of the panel that I see here. You've been making my job easier as moderator. It sounds like we're all open to continued education as the years progress, including next year. That may include in-person education as well, but because there's uncertainties, add a contingency plan. It sounds like we're open to thinking about diverse perspectives in both the planning and the outcome of educational activities. And we all want to pull the patient voice through in our educational strategies. Thank you so much, panel, for joining me. Derek, why don't I leave it to you?
Thank you, John. Thank you, panel, for another tremendous session. Really great stuff. Hope everyone noticed Griselda's t-shirt that she had on. Special shout out. Next time we can all have Griselda for President t-shirts, I think would be the next time around. So thank all of you. Let me bring up the slides really quickly. So please, if you can, take our survey. It's on the live page. It's only 7 questions long. It'll only take you a minute or two to go through, I promise. And then also, before I talk about next session, I wanted to mention this was our lunchtime session, and I wanted to thank Free CME, who gave free lunch to 25 different people from our Grubhub lunch special promotion. First time we tried this, it seemed to work out pretty well. Next time we'll try to get for more people, because we definitely have more than 25 people. Next session coming up is, I lost my list, here it is. It's our CME dictionary session, which should be fun. This is the first time we're doing that. So make sure you tune into that. Remember, it's different this year. You don't have to refresh the screen. You just click on the link on the live page for the next session. And lastly, I'm going to give a shout out to the 4 p.m. CME Pop Trivia session. We don't always get a huge showing for our last session of the day. So you could win prizes. I promise. It'll be me. There'll be music. It'll be fun. So stick around to, of course, watch all the sessions, but especially the 4 o'clock one. And with that, thank you, everyone. I'm going to wrap up the broadcast, and we'll talk to you all later.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.